we have it again. Another week where people have just, Trish and Ash have laid out for us that knowing, that deep inner knowing, so that we can get closer and closer to that being the default, that being what it is that we remember no matter what the circumstance is going on in front of us at any given moment. My talk for today is called Shift Your Default, How to Shift Your Default. But first, a joke. Minister dies and winds up at the gates of heaven, and St. Peter is there, and in front of him is a taxi driver in a t-shirt and wild hair, and St. Peter asks the taxi driver his name, and then he checks the book, and he goes, "Oh, well, here," and gives him a gold staff and gives him a silk gown and leads him to this gorgeous home. And then up next is the minister, and the minister gives his name, and he's given a wooden stick and a cotton gown and shown to a woodshed. And he's like, what? How's this possible? I was the minister of a large church and preached every week. And St. Peter said, well, we work on results up here. When you preached, people slept. When he drove, people prayed. All right. Shifting your default. The one thing I notice about the spiritual practice and consciousness and growing is that it's so personal. People talk about it as if there's some generic way to shift who we are. We're born and we develop these defaults of ways of being. And as kids, repeat them. Somebody just unmuted. Let's see what went on there. Good. All right. And repeat them over and over, those ways of reactions to whatever the behavior is. And over time it becomes our default. Okay, somebody's still unmuted. Let's see if I can hit that. There we go. Let's see. Can you guys, did I just mute myself as well? No. All right. So we're good here. Personal. All right. So to talk about this shift that happens, I need to speak about it from a very personal place to give you an example of what it's like to actually see a shift occur. The thing about our defaults is, as I was saying, they're formed by doing the same thing over and over and over until it's like a cut in the old, if anybody remembers the old vinyl records, the grooves, that's the word I'm looking for, the grooves in the record. And like a needle, we follow those grooves. And so an event happens and we default to that type of behavior and those feelings and how we are being around that. And then something similar happens and we go back to that same type of behavior and our feelings and everything about that. And so how do we shift that? How do we raise our consciousness to a point where something shifts? And so the example I'm going to use is Ash and my relationship. I don't know if many of you know, we met online, and no, not on a dating service. We met on Facebook. And we started our relationship as a long distance relationship. Now we were on, at the time, Skype was the thing. And so we're on Skype almost pretty much every day, talking with each other and being with each other. But you really don't know a person until you're with them. And so, we fell in love long distance. We got together a few times, which was very exciting, that kind of honeymoon period. And then all of a sudden we decided we needed to move forward in our relationship, and we moved in together. And when we did that, we started to learn for the first time about some of our defaults. One of the things that we learned fairly early on was when Ash and I had an argument, her default was to avoid and run. My default was to get anxious about her running. And so I'd be freaking out about her trying to avoid and glom on and try to stick to her as she's trying to get away. Now, if you can imagine that picture in your mind, you can see how that would, be a problem in relationship, and yet it was our defaults. And so over time, we actually started to notice that this was how we could label these defaults in a way that we could understand them. And so what I bring to you is the first thing you need to do to shift any default is awareness. You need to become aware of what it is you're doing over and over and over when an event occurs before you possibly have any chance of shifting it. And so that's the beginning. The beginning is simply becoming aware that this is what's going on. And so Ash and I became aware. Now, the thing about this is shifting your default is not a group project. I could not help Ash shift her default. She could not help me shift mine. Now we can support each other as anyone can support somebody else, but you can't help them. Nobody can make somebody or help somebody or move somebody along to shift their defaults, as nobody can do that for you. So the first step in shifting is awareness. And the second step is recognizing that the only one who can shift your default is you. But if you haven't gotten to the point of where you recognize and admit to yourself you have a default that isn't working in your life, well then you don't have a chance to shift it. You got to recognize that there's something going on that you keep doing over and over and over that isn't working. So I recognized I had this anxiety thing going on in relationship. Ash recognized she had this avoidance thing going on in relationship. And even though we were interacting and living together and working with each other, the real work was on our own. Each one of us having to dig in and go, this isn't really working. This is not working for our relationship to work. And I care enough about this relationship to do something about it. And that's step 2. You got to care enough to shift. You got to care enough and dig in enough and feel it enough to really want to make that shift. Because, the thing about our defaults is they're incredibly comfortable. We really, unless we're challenged or there's something we want more, we have zero reason to change how we default with things. In fact, I have heard people defend their defaults. Hey, this is just who I am. You got to accept me for who I am. And you get to play life like that. You get to play life like accept me for who I am when there's really work to be done. Because the work you'll be doing isn't just for you. You'll benefit from shifting your defaults, but the work you're doing isn't just for you. It's for every single person you come in contact with. Because if you become a model of shifting your defaults to what you truly want, who you truly came here to be. I mean, we need as many models of that as we can get in this world. We have way too many models of people who have been doing the same default since they were 5 and are now in their 60s and 70s still acting like they're 5. We don't need that. We need people who are willing to rise. So step 2 is that you gotta want it. Step 3 is then you gotta be willing to find a way. You know, I boxed, and one of the things when I was boxing, when I first started out boxing, was the trainer I was working with, he would be able to duck and poke around and move his head all around to the point where no matter what I did, I could not hit him. I'm swinging like crazy. This guy isn't even swinging back. All he's doing is ducking and poking this way and that way. And all I'm doing is missing him. And all he kept saying over and over to me is, find a way, find a way, find a way. And I was really lucky to have that training because it stuck with me whenever I want to shift anything. I think of that line, find a way. Find a way. Keep at it. Keep at it. So I started looking at those things I needed to do to not be so anxious if Ash needed to pull away. And Ash was looking at what she needed to do to not pull away so much. And so the two of us are like in this thing, working on changing this incredibly deep groove of how we react to, you know, those type of tight situations. I mean, it was the clearness and the obviousness of the depth of the groove we were dealing with was pretty overwhelming for both of us when we first realized this was going on. So we moved forward, both of us, independently. Sure, we got to see the results of that independent work with each other, which is great, which is the third step, feedback. Feedback is good. Seeing how you're actually playing out is good. It really shows you, you know, there's this great saying, if you ever want to know how conscious you really are, go home and visit your family of origin. There's a reason that people say stuff like that. When you're in that tight, intimate place, that's where the truth comes out of where you're really at. It's easy to come across and feel and be conscious. Oh, I'm such a conscious being when life is going well and you don't have those sticky little points that have, you know, were grown into you as a child and may still be sticking around, but nobody's pushing them right now. Well, the two places they get pushed are when you're at your family of origin and if you're in an intimate relationship where you're living together and you're bumping up against each other every day. Then you get to see where your consciousness really is. And so that kind of feedback really helps. I mean, I don't even need Ash to tell me when I'm feeling anxious, well, or, you know, or that stuff's going on because I can experience it. I feel it in my body. And I'm sure she doesn't need me to point out when she's being avoidant because she can feel it when she's running out the door. But you know what? Here's the funny part about that. We don't do that no more. We don't. Neither of those two things are going on. We shifted some incredibly deep defaults in us by wanting to, working at it, getting feedback, and finding a way. But that only happens when you keep at it. You got to just get in there and want it so much that it overrides the idea that this is hard. Because you know what? I mean, maybe it won't be for you, but it is for me. To shift those deep defaults for me personally has been difficult. But I noticed that it's worth it. So I keep at it. And I offer to you that it's worth it to keep at it. We all have defaults, ways of being that we would rather do differently. Well, if you'd rather respond differently to life, you got to work at it. You got to find your way, find your spiritual practice, and keep at it. I got a quote here somewhere. I want to read to you from Dr. Holmes. What the world needs is spiritual conviction followed by spiritual experience. I would rather see a student of this science prove its principle than to have them repeat all the words of wisdom that have ever been uttered. It is far easier to teach the truth than to practice it. I love that quote. I love that Ernest was so clear about that particular thing. I get calls all the time from people who complain that they have studied the science of mind for over 20 years and don't have any results. My answer to them is, how much have you practiced? Because it is in the practice, not the study. I'm not saying don't study. Taking classes is great. But one of the greatest parts about classes is it reminds you to practice. Because this is a practice that's all day long. You know, people who meditate in the morning and then meditate at night, but then flip out all day long, are not getting it. There is so much more to this that happens in the moment. And when we can recognize in the moment that this is where I need to shift, this is where a newness needs to happen, this is where I need to have that spiritual conviction to rise and bring out my best right now, dig myself out of that groove, because that's what we're doing. We're actually climbing out of these deep, sometimes incredibly deep grooves to make a new one, to create something new and different for ourselves. And when we do that for the world. You know, shifting our defaults isn't just for us. It's for everyone. We need all the models we can get. You can be one of those models. When you're ready to take on that moment where shift is, you know, where you can see that a shift would make a huge difference right here and now. I believe in you. I believe in me. I believe in what I see what my wife and I have done in terms of like, no, that dynamic doesn't happen between us at all anymore. Now, I'm not saying our relationship is perfect. We have other things we're still working on, but that one is gone. I mean, gone. And it's amazing to think that something that both of us have carried all our lives has healed and shifted and changed to the point where it is non-existent in our relationship now. That's what's possible. And because that has shifted, other things are shifting. And our relationship gets to keep growing and growing and growing. Now, maybe in what you're dealing with in your life has nothing to do with anxious and avoidant and those kinds of things. You have your own personal defaults that you're dealing with, and they're different from mine. But what I can tell you is, find a way. Spiritual conviction is worth it. And proving principle is what we do here. I love you. Thank you. That's my talk for today.
God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What I give, I receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am, and so it is.